On November 15th, 2022, the United Nations confirmed the human population crossed 8 billion. It was a milestone, a headline, and then it was forgotten. But 3,700 years earlier, a Babylonian scribe pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and recorded what happens when humanity grows too numerous. That tablet survived. It is sitting in a museum in London right now, and what it describes has already begun. The tablet sits in a climate-controlled case in the Mesopotamian Gallery of the British Museum. Its catalogue number is BM 78941. Most visitors walk past it without a second glance. It is a slab of baked clay, roughly the size of a man's hand, covered in tight rows of wedge-shaped cuneiform script pressed into the surface with a sharpened reed. The edges are chipped. Parts of the surface have flaked away over 37 centuries. But what remains is legible. And what is legible is one of the most disturbing documents the ancient world ever produced. Scholars call it the Atrahasis Epic. W.G. Lambert and A.R. Millard of the University of Oxford published the definitive translation in 1969 through Oxford University Press. Their work revealed that the Atrahasis is not a fragmentary myth or a loose collection of divine stories. It is a coherent three-tablet narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The story it tells is structured, sequential, and precise. And the central event that drives the entire plot is not divine jealousy. It is not human sin. It is not moral corruption. The trigger, stated explicitly in the cuneiform, is that humanity grew too numerous. The population crossed a threshold, and when it did, the gods responded. The first tablet opens before humanity exists. The world is maintained by a class of lesser gods called the Igigi. These beings dig the canals, clear the riverbeds, and stack the levees that keep the rivers of southern Mesopotamia from flooding the farmland. The work is brutal and endless. The Igigi labor for generation after generation under the authority of the greater gods, led by Enlil, Lord of the Wind, whose temple stood in the city of Nippur in what is now southern Iraq. After what the text records as 3,600 years of forced labor, the Igigi revolt. They burn their tools. They surround Enlil's dwelling at night. The divine assembly convenes in crisis. The gods need a replacement labor force. Enki, god of fresh water and wisdom, whose cult center stood at the city of Eridu near the modern Iraqi town of Abu Shahrain, proposes a solution. A new creature will be fashioned from clay and divine blood to carry the yoke the Igigi have cast off. The mother goddess Nintu mixes the clay. A god named Wei-Ila is slaughtered, and his blood is folded into the mixture. 14 pinches of clay become 14 human beings, 7 male and 7 female. Humanity is not born. Humanity is manufactured. The purpose of our species, according to this text, is to perform the physical labor the gods no longer wish to do themselves. 1,200 years pass. The text is explicit about this interval. Humanity spreads across the river plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates. The population grows. Cities rise from the mud. The land fills with human activity. And then the Atrahasis records a line that Lambert and Millard translated with careful precision. The land bellowed like a bull. The people had multiplied. Their noise disturbed Enlil. For decades, translators assumed the Akkadian word hubaru meant literal noise, the clamor of human voices, babies crying, merchants shouting, hammers ringing against stone. But Jean Bottero, the French Assyriologist who spent his career at the École pratique des hautes études in Paris, argued in his 2001 book Religion in Ancient Mesopotamia that hubaru does not mean noise in the acoustic sense. It means the turbulence created by a population that has exceeded its boundaries. The pressure on land, on water, on food systems, on the infrastructure the gods designed for a smaller species. Tikva Frymer-Kensky published a supporting analysis in the Biblical Archaeologist Journal in 1977, Volume 40, Number 4. She concluded that the Atrahasis is not describing a divine headache, It is describing a systemic crisis triggered by unchecked growth. The gods are not irritated. They are alarmed. Enlil's response follows a precise sequence. He does not unleash total destruction immediately. The tablet describes 3 distinct interventions, each separated by 1200 years. First, Enlil sends Namtar, the god of pestilence. Disease sweeps through the human population. People die in enormous numbers. The cities thin, the fields quiet. But Enki, who has grown fond of the creatures he helped design, advises Atrahasis, a human whose name means exceedingly wise. Enki tells him to instruct the people to make offerings exclusively to Namtar, to flatter and appease the plague god directly. The strategy works. Namtar relents. Humanity recovers. 1200 years pass. The population grows again and crosses the threshold once more. Enlil sends the second intervention. This time, Adad the storm god withholds rain. The skies close. The rivers shrink. Crops wither in the fields of Sumer and Akkad. Famine grips the land. The text describes people growing gaunt, their skins stretched tight over their bones. Once again, Enki whispers instructions to Atrahasis. Make offerings only to Adad. Appease the specific god responsible. Again it works. Rain returns. Humanity recovers. 1200 years pass. The population crosses the threshold a third time. Now Enlil cuts off all divine support simultaneously. No rain. No river floods. No grain. No fish from the sea. The famine becomes total. The text records a detail so specific it resists metaphorical interpretation. The people began eating their own children. And after this third failure to keep humanity within its limits, Enlil convenes the full divine assembly and demands the final solution: a flood to wipe the earth clean. Every god is bound by oath. No one is permitted to warn the humans. But Enki does not speak to Atrahasis directly. Instead, he stands beside a reed wall and speaks aloud, addressing the wall itself. Atrahasis, listening from the other side, hears every word. Build a boat, seal it with pitch, load your family and the animals aboard. Abandon everything else. The flood comes, the rivers rise, the storms descend. 7 days and 7 nights of water erase every city, every field, every human settlement between the mountains and the sea. When the waters recede, Atrahasis opens the boat and makes an offering. The gods, starving without human labor and sacrifice, gather around the smoke like flies. This is the phrase the tablet uses. Like flies around the offering. They are desperate. They are hungry. They realize they need humanity after all. But Enlil is furious that anyone survived. And this is where the Atrahasis narrative diverges from every popular retelling of the flood story. What happens next is the part most channels never mention, because the story does not simply reset. After the flood, a negotiation takes place among the gods. Enki and the mother goddess Nintu establish a new covenant for the post-flood world. This covenant does not restore the original conditions. It installs permanent restrictions on human fertility. Lambert and Millard translated the critical passage from Tablet 3. 3 new features are introduced into human existence that did not exist before the flood. The first is a demon called Pashitu, a child-snatching spirit who takes infants from their mothers. This is the divine institution of infant mortality as a structural feature of the world. The second is the creation of classes of women who are forbidden to bear children. The text names them specifically: the Ugbabtu priestess, the Entu priestess, the Ejisitu priestess. These are not punishments directed at individuals. They are social categories, entire classes of women removed from the reproductive population by divine decree. The third restriction is a general reduction in human lifespan compared to the pre-flood era. The Sumerian king list records pre-flood kings ruling for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, the reigns shrink rapidly from centuries to decades to the normal human range. Whether these numbers are literal or symbolic, the pattern is unmistakable. The post-flood world is designed to be smaller, shorter-lived, and slower growing than the world that came before. The gods did not simply punish humanity with the flood. They redesigned the species afterward. They installed population limiters. And the Atrahasis presents these limiters not as curses, but as features. This is the architecture of the new world. Now consider what has been happening since the turn of the 21st century. The United Nations World Population Prospects report published in 2022 contains projections that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Global fertility has been falling for decades. When the growth rate peaked in 1968 at 2.1% per year, demographers assumed the curve would flatten slowly over centuries. It did not. It fell fast. Today, more than half the countries on Earth have fertility rates below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. South Korea recorded a total fertility rate of 0.72 in 2023. That is the lowest national fertility rate ever documented in human history. Japan has been below replacement since the 1970s. Italy, Spain, and Germany have been below replacement for decades. China, the most populous nation on Earth, recorded its first population decline in 60 years in 2022, the same year the world crossed 8 billion. Darrell Bricker and John Ibbotson argued in their 2019 book, Empty Planet, published by Crown, that the global population may peak not in 2100 as the United Nations projects, but decades earlier. Their research suggests the decline, once it begins, may be irreversible because the social and economic structures that suppressed fertility will not reverse themselves even if governments try to encourage larger families. The 8 billion milestone was not a launch point. It may have been the summit. The Atrahasis is not the only ancient text that describes a world destroyed after population growth. The same structural narrative appears across cultures that had no known contact with one another. The Hebrew Bible records the flood in Genesis chapters 6 through 9. Jeffrey Tigay of the University of Pennsylvania demonstrated in his 1982 study, The Evolution of the Gilgamesh Epic, that the Genesis account is a direct literary descendant of the Mesopotamian tradition. The parallels are not thematic, they are structural, and in places nearly word for word. But the pattern extends far beyond the ancient Near East. In the Hindu tradition, the Matsya Purana describes the god Vishnu appearing in the form of a fish to warn a man named Manu that a great flood will consume the world. Manu builds a boat. He survives. Humanity begins again. Wendy Doniger documented this tradition in her 1975 edition Hindu Myths, published by Penguin Classics. In Greek mythology, Zeus destroys humanity with a flood after the population grows and impiety spreads. Only Deucalion and Pyrrha survive on a wooden chest. They repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders. In the Aztec tradition, the Five Suns cosmology describes 4 previous worlds, each destroyed when humanity exceeded its design parameters. Miguel León Portilla analyzed this cyclical destruction model in his 1963 work Aztec Thought and Culture, published by the University of Oklahoma Press. The standard scholarly explanation for these parallels is cultural diffusion from a single Mesopotamian source. But the Aztec and certain Hindu versions predate any confirmed contact with the Near East. 5 continents, dozens of cultures. The same story. Humanity grows, a threshold is crossed, destruction follows, a remnant survives, and new restrictions are imposed on the species going forward. If these texts describe a recurring pattern, then the question becomes whether that pattern has a mathematical structure. The Sumerian king list provides a clue. The WB444 prism, held at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, records the reigns of pre-flood kings in units called SR. 1 SAR equals 3,600 years. The total pre-flood period across all 8 kings sums to 241,200 years. Thorkild Jacobson published the critical edition of the King List in 1939 through the University of Chicago Press. The 1,200-year interval between each population crisis in the Atrahasis is exactly 1/3 of a SAR. The number 3,600 is 60 multiplied by 60. The Sumerian mathematical system was sexagesimal, built on base 60 rather than base 10. Every interval in these texts is a clean product of 60. Whether these are literal years, symbolic units, or encoded ratios, the numerical architecture is deliberate. The scribes were not recording random durations. They were working within a defined mathematical framework that described cycles of growth, crisis, reduction, and regrowth. Thomas Robert Malthus would not have been surprised by any of this. In 1798, Malthus published an essay on the principle of population in London. His central argument was simple and devastating. Population grows geometrically. Resources grow arithmetically. The gap between the two is corrected by what he called positive checks: famine, disease, and war. These are the same three interventions, in the same order, that the Atrahasis describes 3,500 years before Malthus was born. In 1972, a team of researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology took Malthus's framework and fed it into a computer. The Club of Rome had commissioned a study called The Limits to Growth. Donella Meadows and her colleagues built a systems dynamics model called World 3 that simulated the interaction of population, food production, industrial output, pollution, and resource depletion over a 200-year horizon. The standard run, the scenario with no major policy intervention, projected that global systems would overshoot Earth's carrying capacity sometime in the first half of the 21st century and then collapse. In 2004, Meadows, Randers, and Meadows published a 30-year update. Real-world data from 1972 to 2004 tracked the standard run, the overshoot and collapse scenario, more closely than any of the optimistic alternatives. The 8 billion milestone falls squarely within the projected overshoot window. Return to the post-flood restrictions recorded on the Atrahasis tablets. The gods installed 3 population limiters: infant death, institutionalized infertility, and shortened lifespans. The modern world has all but eliminated infant mortality in developed nations. That limiter has been removed. But the other 2 have not simply persisted. They have intensified. Haggai Levine of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem published a meta-analysis in Human Reproduction Update. In 2017, that documented a 51.6% decline in sperm concentration among men in Western countries between 1973 and 2011. The decline has not reversed. It has accelerated. Shanna Swan of the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai expanded the analysis in her 2021 book, Countdown, published by Scribner, warning that if current trends continue, the median sperm count could approach 0 by 2045. Voluntary childlessness is at historic highs across every developed economy. The religious celibacy classes of the ancient world, the Ug-Babtu and Entu priestesses named in the Atrahasis, have been replaced by economic and cultural childlessness. The mechanism is different. The structural effect is identical. Fewer births, smaller generations, a species that is slowing down. The Atrahasis does not predict the specific mechanism. It predicts the architecture. A post-crisis world where fertility is not eliminated but structurally suppressed. The Atrahasis does not name a specific population number as the trigger. Cuneiform mathematics could express quantities in the millions. The Sumerians had the notation. But the text uses qualitative language. The land bellowed like a bull. The people multiplied. The noise was too great. However, the text is explicit that a threshold exists. There is a line that humanity crosses, and every time that line is crossed, the system responds. The 1,200-year intervals suggest the threshold is not fixed, but cyclical. Reached, corrected, reached again. Each time the correction is more severe than the last. Plague, then drought, then famine, then flood. Modern population science describes a strikingly similar trajectory. The growth rate peaked. It is now falling. Fertility is collapsing worldwide. Resources are straining under 8 billion bodies requiring food, water, shelter, and energy simultaneously. Whether or not the Atrahasis encodes a literal number, the pattern it describes, growth to a threshold followed by systemic correction, maps precisely onto the trajectory the modern world is currently following. The 8 billion marker may not be a magic number written in cuneiform, but it sits exactly where the pattern says the threshold should be. The tablet is still there. BM 78941 in its glass case in Bloomsbury. The air around it is filtered and temperature controlled to keep the clay from crumbling further. 37 centuries ago, a scribe in the river country between the Tigris and the Euphrates pressed these signs into wet earth because he believed he was recording something that had happened before and would happen again. The civilization that built the temple where he worked is dust. The canals the Igigi dug in the story are dry ditches in the Iraqi desert. The cities of Sumer are mounds of rubble that archaeologists sift with brushes and dental picks. But the clay survived. And the text on it describes a cycle. The population grows. The threshold is crossed. The correction comes. The world is rebuilt with new limits. The population grows again. The United Nations publishes the data every year. The curve is bending. The fertility rates are falling. The question the tablet leaves behind is not whether the pattern is real. The pattern is visible in every demographic dataset on Earth. The question is where we are in the cycle, and whether the correction has already begun.